Assalamu alaikum class. Today we are starting with our lecture number 4 that is related to development of theoretical framework. Previously we had talked about literature review whereby we were trying to look at how and where we will look for literature which is concerning our problem area. Then what we did was after doing the literature review, we learned how to document the literature which we had studied, which we had observed, which we had collected, and once we document that in a specific format, that is the APA format, we briefly looked at that we are able to develop based on the literature our research questions. And following that, briefly we talked about that we develop our theoretical framework, which is basically a representation of your beliefs on the variables which are influencing the problem area. So in the literature review, what we did was we tried to find out different variables which were influencing our dependent variable, and once we had identified those variables, what we did was we tried to develop a model based on that, and basically our research is basically founded on that theoretical framework. What we briefly also introduced and talked about was that within the theoretical framework there are different types of variables, such as the independent, dependent, moderating and mediating variable. Today we're going to take up the discussion from there onwards, that is how we develop our theoretical framework, and underlying the theoretical framework we have different types of variables. So let's start with that. Once we are able to define our research problem after conducting the literature review, or clearly define or list our research questions, that is based on what are the different variables are found in our literature and what are the significance of those variables on our dependent variable. What we tend to do is we try to develop a theoretical framework, and theoretical framework is a conceptual model of showing what we theorize, that is, in our theory, how do we see the relationship between different variables in our research. Basically, what I want to say is that in our theoretical framework, we try to list the variables, identify the variables, and then we try to see what is the relationship of these variables with the dependent variable, and we try to based on that we try to develop a schematic diagram, a model, and then from that point onwards we try to develop our hypothesis based on those theoretical framework. So let's look at an example from the very beginning. Now let's say we had the problem in our organization was that the sales was depleting, the sales were going down. While reviewing, by conducting interviews, by observing, by going through the literature, what we found out was that different factors influence the sales, and few of those factors which I identified were such as the quality of the product, which we identified as one of the causes of sales drop in our organization. Another from the literature, we found out that the price was another factor because of which our sales was dropping. Maybe it was too high, or maybe the competition is another reason which was causing the drop in sales. Maybe the competition, the competitors, there are more competitors who have entered the market and they are competing for the same market, hence the sales of our product has depleted. So we had identified that the sales are going down, this is our problem. While going through the literature and the interviews, we identified certain factors which influence that sales, the dropping of the sales. And based on that, we wanted to know that, okay, if these are the different factors which are influencing, the second thing we wanted to look at, what the type of relationship these factors have with our dependent variable. So so first thing we did was we identified the problem, the problem, and that is usually when we say the problem, what we mean by in terms of variables, the dependent variable, and we wanted to look at that what are the different variables which influences the dependent variable. And once we are able to identify the different variables, different factors which influence our dependent variable, we also wanted to know that what is the interrelationship between these different variables, such as once we said that the sales, for in our case, if sales is going down, what is the relationship with the price? And we might be able to say that the higher the price is, the lower the sales will be. Another relationship we might be able to identify is the more the competition is, the lower the sales is. Similarly, the lower the quality of the product is, the lower the sales is. So considering these three different variables, for an example, we had identified that these variables influence our dependent variable, and we also wanted to look at that what kind of relationship they have in this case which I was discussing just now. All of these had some sort of a negative relationship with it. That is, the more the price, the less the sales. So we have an inverse relationship there. On the other hand, when we say the prices, the more competition there is, the less the sales is. Again, this is an inverse, so forth. So by developing this kind of conceptual framework, we try to claim certain type of we try to claim that what is the relationship is, and we want to develop a hypothesis around that claim. So when we say that the higher the prices are, the lower the sales is, now we're trying to make a claim. So based on the relationship, the next thing we tend to do is we tend to develop a claim, or in research terms we try to develop a hypothesis. So we claim, or we hypothesize, that the higher the prices are, the lower the sales is, or the lower the quality is, the lower the sales is. So in this particular case, when we say the lower the quality is, the lower the sales is, this is a positive kind of a relationship, or a direct kind of a relationship, and we claim that there is a positive relationship between between the quality of the product and the sales of the product. So from the framework, as I said, that we basically develop our hypothesis statements, which are then tested to find out if our theory was valid or not. So the thing is, at the end of the whole process is that we found out a problem. We said what are the issues which are influencing that problem, and once we identify those issues which influence the problem, we try to make claims about those issues, that issue A, B, C, what is the effect, what is the impact of these issues on the dependent variable or the problem. And once we are able to develop our hypothesis statements, what we do, the next thing we tend to do is we try to test it and prove that whatever we theorized, whatever theory we had developed, has that been substantiated, has that been proved, has that been properly justified or not. So in our case, the one I was discussing just briefly, that if the sales are depleting, and we were saying that what is the relationship between sales and quality, sales and the competition, sales and the price. in that case, these hypothesis statements we tend to make are something like that. We're saying that is there a positive relationship between the price, between the quality and the sales. That is, the lower the quality, the lower the sales is. That's a positive relationship. On the other hand, we're saying the higher the prices are, the lower the sales are. It's a negative relationship. And similarly, the more the competition is, the less the sales is. So in that case, these are the three different claims we are making. And what we want to do is, at a later stage or through research, is to substantiate it, or to prove that the way we theorize, the way we are claiming, the way we are saying is the correct thing. And we will try to prove that by going on and collecting some data and running certain tests to prove that based on the data we've collected and based on the different tests we have applied, our claim was true or wrong. So keeping that thing in mind, this is the model we were talking about, and in that case, let's see. So we are saying the higher the quality, the lower the sales is. So the higher the price is, the lower the sales is. The higher the competition is, the lower the sales is. Now, what I want you to look at is, because here I'm using the word quality and then price and competition, but if I qualify the word bad quality or low quality, then the relationship between these two changes. When I'm saying, if I use the word low quality here, so the relationship with sales becomes a more positive relationship, meaning the lower the quality, the lower the sales is. See? So depending on the adjective you're using, your relationship representation might change, but generally you need to look at that. If this is the variable, what is the relationship with the other dependent variable? So when we say quality, and if we are saying low quality, then lower the quality, lower the sales. So the relationship we are saying is a negative one. Price, we're saying, if you're saying higher the price, the lower the sales. Again, in that case, the higher the price, the lower the sales. Then we are saying that it's an inverse relationship. And we're saying the higher the competition, the lower the sales. So this is an inverse relationship. So you need to see what kind of adjective you're using right next to the variables you are saying, how you're stating, how you're putting the statement. If you're saying high quality, high sales, then this relationship becomes a positive relationship. That is, the higher the quality, the higher the sales. You see the point now, that the way I'm stating, quality is the variable we're working out, but if I use the word higher quality, and then I'm using the word here higher sales, then the relationship becomes a positive one. The higher the quality, the higher the sales. If I'm saying lower the quality, lower will be the sales. So one need to be careful on that. Other than that, we basically had identified in the literature that these are the three different variables which are influencing our dependent variable or our problem area, and the problem area was sales. And we wanted to identify that quality, price, and competition were the different factors which are influencing the sales. Okay. Once we had identified the general variables, we also need to be clear on the type of these variables are, because based on the types, they have different functions or different relationships. One of the most important variable, as we talked about earlier, was a dependent variable, which is also called the criterion variable. This is the variable which is of primary interest to us. This is the area which is basically focused or centered in our problem. And so whatever the problem we have is basically converted into what we call as a dependent variable. So what we try to do is try to describe or explain the variability or predict it. We want basically trying to see can we predict the dependent variable, what is the changes in the dependent variable. And since we are saying dependent variable, this is the variable which is being influenced by different factors, and we want to explain what kind of changes it will have based on the different factors which are influenced. In other words, what I mean to say is that because sales is our concerned area, or sales is the criterion variable, we want to know that what kind of factors which influence them, and this is, in this case, sales becomes your dependent variable. So by studying these, we might be able to find the solution to the problems, because while we're saying that sales is being influenced by these four different factors, what we are trying to find out the solutions for low sales. In other words, we scientifically try to convert, or in a more logical way, we try to convert our problem and the factors which influence it through research. And in research, what we tried to do was that we wanted to find the solution of a problem, and the problem we said was sales, and the solution lies with the factors which influence that. So in a scientific manner, what we did was we segregated our problem into a dependent variable and factors which influence the issues which influence our the problem. We consider them as independent variable, which are the predictable variables. These influence the dependent variable. The influence might be positive or negative, and when the independent variable is present, the dependent variable is also present. Here what we mean is that whenever your dependent variable, will exist if only your independent variable are there. That is, because of the independent variable, your dependent variable will exist. And with each unit of increase of the independent variable, there is an increase or decrease in the dependent variable. What I mean by that is that if we increase our quality of our product, we will see an increase also in the sales, or when we see an increase in the competition, what we see is a decrease in sales. So every unit increase or decrease in the independent variable will result a change in the dependent variable, meaning whenever there is a change in the independent variable, because that's which is independent, it's not controlled, it's independent, we see that it has an effect on your dependent variable, meaning the dependent variable is dependent on independent variable. So whenever there is a change in the independent variable, we will see a change in the dependent variable as well. It could have a positive or a negative impact, but nevertheless, when we claim there is a relationship and we claim that an independent variable influences your dependent variable, what we should see is that if there is a change in the independent variable, either it's an increase in the independent variable or the value of the independent variable increases or decreases, there should be some change in your dependent variable. So either increase or decrease in the dependent variable. So this is what we are saying. Another variable which could also influence could be advertising, which again, the more advertising we do, the more sales we'll have. Let's look at this small statement, which is the shape of a problem, that if a manager believes that good supervision and training would increase the production level of workers, in this particular statement, there are a few things we need to look at. That if a manager believes that good supervision and training would increase the production level variables, in this scenario, what do you think would be the dependent variable? or the variable which is of the utmost interest to us, the key or the variable which is centered around the problem. So what is the problem in this particular statement, or what is the problem the manager is addressing at? Well, if you look at it, it says a manager believes that good supervision and training would increase the production level. In this statement, if you look at, the focus is production level, which is the managers are concerned with production level. They want to know. So this is the problem area. The production level is the problem area, which they want to improve by some means, and what they had identified that good supervision and training would increase this. So if we draw the schematic or theoretical framework around it, what we'll see is, in this scenario, we'll see that production will be your dependent variable, and good supervision and training would be your independent variable. Meaning, the better the supervision, the more production you will have. Similarly, the more training you provide to your employees, the higher the production level you will achieve. So again, by looking at this statement, we are able to now convert the statement into independent and dependent variables. In this case, production level is your dependent variable, and supervision and trainings are your independent variable. Let's look at another example. In this example, I've already drawn the model. In this model, what we are trying to say is that the more the availability of the manuals the reference manuals available to the employees are, the less the number of rejects you will have in your production units. So here we're trying to say that if they on the site where they're being where they're producing certain products, the number of rejects is a problem there. They want to reduce the number of rejects, that while producing certain products, they want to make sure that the number of rejects or the products which are not of certain level or quality which are rejected, they want to reduce that. So they're saying that if we have more reference manuals available, the number of rejects will drop down. In this case, the number of rejects is your dependent variable. The availability of the manuals to run your system better, to run your production systems better. If you have those reference manuals, they will have better production, hence less number of rejects. Okay, let's look at another kind of a variable which is called the moderating variable. A moderating variable has what we call a strong contingent, or what we say is conditional effect on the independent-dependent relationship. What I mean by that is that a moderating variable affects the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. This variable, what we say is, has a conditional effect on the relationship. That is, in the presence of this variable, that is a moderating variable, the relationship between the independent and dependent will be modified, such as we said that if the availability of the manuals are more, the rejects will be reduced. So the more the availability of the manuals, the less the rejects will be. This was our independent-dependent variables. But then while going through the literature, it was found out that although the manuals might be there in the organization or on the factory available, but it is the interest, the inclination of the managers, of the employees, which will make the difference actually. If the interest is there or the inclination of the employees is there to read those manuals and apply those manuals, then only the rejects will be reduced. By just having those manuals lying around, placed somewhere in the factory, does not make the rejects or does not reduce the rejects automatically. It's conditional to the interest of the employees. If they go through those manuals, they take the interest of going and reading through those manuals, following those manuals and applying those manuals, that is when the rejects will drop. If there is no interest, the relationship will not exist. But if there is interest, then this relationship will exist. So what I'm developing here is a condition. When employees take interest, this relationship exists. When there is no interest, this does not exist. So a moderating variable basically tends to conditionalize this relationship. He's saying the relationship is there, but it's conditional on the availability of on the moderating variable. When the moderating variable is there, especially, and the condition, if it satisfies that condition, then this relationship will exist. Otherwise, if the manuals are there in the organization or in the factory, automatically rejects will not be reduced. It is only when when I'm saying if, that's conditional. So it's only when the interests are there or the employees is there to read what is in there and apply what is in there, then the rejects will drop. So this is an example of a moderating variable. Another example let's look at is the example of workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness. In this example, the theory behind this is that if your organization has different types of employees, from different backgrounds, the theory suggests that those organizations are more effective. The theory was the more diversified, more different kind of workforce you have in your organization, the more effectiveness they will bring in, because different workforces from different backgrounds or different diversified backgrounds have different experiences and different ways of doing things. So once this diversified workforce is put together to work in an organization, the theory was that those organizations will be more effective. So more the workforce is diversified, the theory for this example is that the more there is diversified workforce diversity, the more effective the organization will be. But if the theory is further conditionalized, or it is on condition that is saying if the manager's expertise is there to manage this diversified force, then can only the organization will become more effective. Meaning that although there will be a diversified workforce, and the only way they will be more effective to the organization if the manager have those expertise to handle these kind of different people. So because there are different people, different diversified, different backgrounds, different experiences, if the manager is capable enough to basically manage them more properly, then only we will be able to see the effectiveness seen in the organization. Meaning, if the managerial expertise is not there, then this relationship will not exist. Meaning, the more diversified, the more effectiveness, this relationship will not exist. In other words, if managerial expertise is there and they can manage properly this diversified workforce, then only we are able to see the relationship between workforce diversity and the organization effectiveness. Okay, so as we said that we had the independent variables, we had dependent variables. then we came and we talked about a little bit now was the moderating variables. In this particular scenario, we wanted to see that there is certain relationship between certain variables, but it's conditional to the availability of certain other third variable, which is considered to be as moderating variable. Now, a lot of students tend to confuse the independent variable with the moderating variable. We want to make sure that the independent variable and the dependent variable are to be treated separately. As we said, that the independent variable is basically is a variable which will basically improve or influence the dependent variable, but it has a slight change, or if there is a change in the independent variable, it will influence the change in the dependent variable. Now, but in this scenario, a change in this will change this, but in the moderating case, we're not saying there is a change in the moderating variable and the dependent variable change. Rather, we're saying that the relationship between these two variables will change, not that the dependent variable change, but the relationship between these two variables change. Again, going back to the previous example here, we're saying the change in the moderating variable is not going to change the dependent variable. It is going to change the relationship between the two variables. So the independent variable is supposed to bring change in the dependent variable, whereas the moderating variable is supposed to bring change in the relationship of the variable. So the difference between these two is this is bringing change in the dependent variable, whereas this is bringing change into the relationship. So here it's trying to change the relationship between these two guys, between these two variables, between these two different variables. It's trying to change. If this variable is there, it's going to make that difference. Okay, let's look at another example. That we're saying in a situation A, if the quality of training program is increased in an organization and the employee have a high growth need, they want to employees who want to a high need for growth. If you have in an organization that there are quality programs introduced and you have employees who want to grow, who want to move forward in their careers. If these two variables are available, then you will see that in that organization you will find a lot of willingness to learn new ways of doing things. Meaning, the dependent variable in this case, or the scenario which is of interest to us, is the willingness to learn new ways. We're saying in an organization, what are the different factors which influences employees to learn the new ways? What are the different factors which influence the learning of new ways or innovative ways of doing things? So because in organizations people are, or they're used to doing old ways, their ways of doing things, and in those kind of scenarios where people are used to doing the old way of doing things, they don't try to learn the new way. So one of the issue in this scenario is the management is keen to know that when do people learn new ways, and one of the factors they identify is that if the quality of program increases, training program increases, then you will see people will start learning and learning. On the other hand, they said that you have employees who want to grow and move forward in their careers. More the people you have which have growth needs, the more you have of these types, the more you will find that there will be willingness to learn new ways. Meaning, the more the quality of the program increases, the learning of new ways will be changed, or this variable will increase. A little change in this will bring change in the learning of new ways. An increase in the quality of training programs will be reflected as an increase in the learning of new ways. The more the number of employees who want to grow, and exceed in their careers, the more they will be willing to do the things in a new way. They will learn new ways of doing things. So if this scenario is a typical scenario in which we have these two as independent variables and this is dependent variable, this can be theorized in a different way as well. What I mean by that is sometimes you can have a variable, especially the moderating type of variable, in which that we might have a different way of representing our relationship or representing the effect of that variable, and based on the way we want to propose our theory, the way we want to show our model, the variables can be placed in a slightly different way as well. But in this case we're saying the more the growth, the more the willingness of learning new ways. The more the employees who have growth needs, the more they have. On the other hand, the more the quality of training programs are, the more willingness you will have of training or willingness of learning new ways. Now we can look this scenario in a different way as well. In this scenario, what we did was we brought the growth need down as a moderating variable, and we kept our training programs and learning as dependent variables. Here we switched the situation. And the situation B, we are saying in our theory we're trying to say that the more the quality of the programs is, the more willingness of new ways will be seen in an organization. But they said just having good quality programs not necessarily converts into new ways of learning. That is, if we have good quality of trainings, it does not mean that people will start automatically converting or doing the new ways, or they will start to learn new ways. It said that the theory which we are now proposing is that if it is only in the cases for the employees who have high growth needs, then you will have this relationship exist. If their growth need is low, then this relationship will not exist, or it will not be as strong, it will not be as good as one would propose or one would think of. So we're saying here that quality of the training programs is important, and as we say, it affects the learning of new ways, but it depends on the employees. If some employees, it depends on the kind of employees who have high growth need. In that case, this relationship will exist to be very good. On the other hand, if it's low, then it might not be as one would believe it should be. So we're making this as conditional. Now the growth rate, or the growth need has been converted into a moderating variable here, or considered into a moderating variable. And if you look at the previous example, the previous scenario, I'm here saying the growth need. I'm looking at the more the growth needs of the employees is, we are saying the more the willingness. On the other hand, we're saying growth need employees we divided into two, employees with high and employees with low. So if we can divide them into high and low, we will try to identify that with the low, this relationship will not exist, or it will be very weak. On the other hand, if where it's high, we will have this relationship with this relationship to be very good. So both these scenarios have three variables. The first scenario, training programs and growth needs are independent variables that influence the dependent variable. Scenario 2, we have the dependent variable stays the same, growth need becomes a moderating variable. That is, only those who have high growth needs will become more willing to new things when quality of training is increased. So this is conditional. We're making now that we're not just looking at all the employees, we're saying employees with high growth rate will, in that case, employees with high growth rates will show a willingness to do new things, and the effect of trainings will be there, the quality of training. So we are saying the effect of good quality training on new learning things will depend on if the employee is basically willing to is willing to go higher, willing to basically grow in their organization, and if there is not does not have that growth need or doesn't desire the growth need, then the relationship will cease to exist. So hence the relationship between the dependent and independent will become conditional or contingent on the existence of the moderator. If the moderator moderator's value, basically, if the moderator value is high, that is in the case of growth need is high, then this relation will exist, otherwise it will not. We can look at this example in a more graphical manner. So if we draw a linear effect of training and growth with the willingness of learning, we will see that if we are trying to say that the effect of training and growth needs, the more the training program, the more the growth needs in an organization, the more willingness to learn will be showed in the organization. And this is a linear relationship between these three variables, the first two independent variables and one dependent variable. In this case, we're saying the more the training programs, the more the growth needs in the organization, the more willingness there will be. Now we change the scenario and we're saying, we were just going to see that we're going to compare, basically, and we're going to say we're going to look at the learning willingness of learning, but we're going to look at that from two disparate aspects. One, employees would have high growth needs, and we try to plot that. We're saying the training programs effect on the willingness, but for employees, training programs effect on the willingness, but for the employees with high growth needs. And again, we're going to see the effect of training programs on the willingness for employees who have low growth needs. So employees with low growth needs, you will see the slope or the intensity between the relationship is low, or it's weak as compared to the slope between willingness of between the training and the willingness for high growth needs. Okay, so getting the point here, we're trying to say here that we have the independent training programs, the dependent variables willingness to learn. Both are we're trying to look at the relationship between these two, but we are trying to look at this relationship from two different angles. One, high growth needs and low growth needs, and we see that in certain cases our theory suggests that people who have low growth needs, their training program's effect on willingness will be not as good as one should be thinking. On the other hand, we're saying the effect of training program on the willingness of learning will be there for people who have high growth needs. So we're saying there's we're looking at the growth needs, the variable growth needs from a moderating perspective, that this variable moderates the relationship. Okay, so once we have looked at the moderating variable, there's another type of variable which is called the mediating variable or the intervening variable. Some texts use the word mediating and some texts use the intervening variable. This is the fourth type of variable, the general type of variable, which is usually considered in a model or a theoretical framework in research. And this variable basically surfaces between the time the independent variable operates or to influence dependent variable, meaning that this variable will appear or surface when the independent variable is affecting the dependent variable. It will surface, it will arise, it will show itself when the independent variable is working on the dependent variable, or the effect on the independent variable is operating on the dependent variable. A third variable will surface in between the relationship of the independent and dependent variable. Meaning one of the quality of this variable is it is what called as the temporal, or has a sequential quality. It is based. When we say temporal, it is time. It's restricted by time, and the thing is, it is restricted by sequence. What we mean by that, I will try to demonstrate you with the next example. Let's say that the performance of an exam is what we are trying to study, or the problem area is the exam performance of the students. What we see from literature is the more difficult the exam is, the more the exam difficulty is, the lower the performance is. So here we have the more the difficulty, the lower the performance is. Now we are saying that this could be possible, this could become the way we are looking at the relationship will exist the way we are saying. That is because the more the exam difficulty is, what will happen is it will generate stress. The more stress we have, the lower the performance is. So because of the exam difficulty, stress comes in, and stress then affects the performance. So by virtue that exam difficulty on its own does not really we're saying on a superficial level, we're saying exam difficulty affects the performance. But reality, what happens in the background is that exam difficulty leads to high stress in the students, which the higher the stress is, what we see is that the performance of the employees, of the students deplete or reduces. So we are saying that stress affects the performance. The more the stress there is, the less the performance, and the more the exam difficulty, the more stress is. So in this case, stress is a mediating variable which surfaces in between. Because of the difficulty, stress increases. When stress increases, performance decreases. So this is a variable which is generally not there with the student. If the student is there, and if the difficulty, when we see that the stress will basically influence the performance, meaning we see the exam difficulty has a relationship with the exam performance, but it's through stress. Because on a superficial level we're saying exam difficulty has effect on the performance, but once we look deeper, we will be able to know that exam difficulty actually converts into a stress, and then stress basically affects the performance. So it is basically transformed. Exam difficulty is transformed to another variable, which then affects our final dependent variable. In this case, this particular variable, stress, is considered as the mediating or the intervening variable. Let's have another example where again we talked about workforce diversity, and we said the more the workforce diversity in an organization is, the more effective the organization will become. And there we said that we took the example of the managerial expertise as a moderating variable here of influencing the relationship. Now we have another variable which is creative synergy. In this case, we're saying that workforce diversity will affect the workforce diversity will affect the creative synergy, and then creative synergy in result will affect the organization effectiveness, meaning that workforce diversity does affect the effectiveness, but this is again a superficial level. And in deep, what we're saying that once the workforce diversity, the workforce which is diversified, they try to synergize their activities. When they creatively synergize their activities, meaning they collaborate, they coordinate, they synergize themselves, their creative energies, then the organization effective will form. So directly we're saying that workforce does not affect the organizational effectiveness. What it does is actually the workforce diversity has an indirect effect through creative synergy, meaning the workforce diversity is converted into a creative synergy, which then results in effectiveness of the organization. Meaning, when employees, they are different work backgrounds, different diversity backgrounds, when they are put together to work and they synergize their energies, they collaborate their energies, then only the effectiveness will achieve. So it is this state in between, which is at time one, we're saying workforce diversity is there, but while they collaborate and at time 2, once they are able to, at a different time frame, when they are able to collaborate their energies, then you will find that at time 3 that organization effectiveness will exist, where you will find the effectiveness. So workforce diversity is transformed into creative synergy, which then affects the organization effectiveness. So in this case, this scenario, we're saying that workforce does affect, but it is through the creative energy. So in between, this creative synergy is what we call as an intervening variable. Now, integrating all these 3 activities together, what we see here is that you have your independent variable, which is workforce diversity. If the dependent variable, your organization effectiveness, they have a relationship, but we're saying that workforce diversity is converted into synergy, and then synergy is actually affects the organization effectiveness. But we are saying that the managerial expertise helps them convert these synergies, convert these diversities into creative synergies. What the good expert manager will make use of these people, or make them work together in a cordial manner, in a more positive manner, in a more benefiting manner. And because of being this manager as expertise, this synergy will exist, and once the synergy exists, then the effectiveness happens. So if we look at just this part of the relationship from workforce diversity to creative synergy, here again we are saying that it is the managerial expertise as the moderating variable. If the expertise is there to handle the diversified force, and then only you will be able to see the creative energy. Meaning, if managerial expertise is there, if it's not there, then this relationship will not exist. If this relationship does not exist, naturally the rest of the relationship will be also affected. So we're saying workforce diversity will be converted into synergy only when managers have expertise. If they don't have this, and this creative synergy will not exist. If creative synergy will not affect, then the effectiveness of the organization will not be achieved. So as an integrating model of the moderating mediating variable with your independent dependent variable, we now have a different theory, or different model, or different theoretical framework, which is saying workforce diversity can affect the effectiveness through creative synergy, depending on if the manager are able to expertly handle the diversity and convert this diversity into a creative synergy, which then affects the organization effectiveness. So, of course, this does give us a handful of things to think about, but as we practice and we start looking at different examples, hopefully we will be able to master this particular concept as well. Okay, so let's look with an next example. Let's say that we are saying that in an organization where teachers might go on strike, we are trying to study organizations where teachers might go on strike. We're saying that pay has an effect on teacher strike, where the theory is saying the better the pays are, the less the chances of strikes are, or the lower the pay is, the higher the chances of strike. Depending on the stance we are making, or the angle we are taking, we're saying the lower the pay is, the higher the chance of teachers to go on strike. Another would be the worse the physical environment is, the higher the chances are of teachers strike. Now, we change our theory. We're saying that this relationship, as we're saying, the less they pay, the higher this is, or the worse the environment, the higher the chance of strike. We're saying this is moderated by dedication. That is, if employees are dedicated, then this relationship, which we are looking at, the inverse relationship between pay and strike, physical environment and strike, will be affected, because if an employee is dedicated, then even though the pay is low, the strike will not come. Even though the physical environment is bad, teachers will not go on strike with teachers which are dedicated. Teachers which are dedicated will not be able to, in that case the relationship will not exist. Teachers who are not dedicated, then you will find the relationship to exist. That is the relationship between pay, low pay, and strike. We will see that in the organization with dedication, or the teachers who have low dedication, there this relationship may exist very clearly, which is the inverse relationship. And similarly, environment, where the physical environment is there, and the possibility of teachers going on strike is there. But if provided the employee is dedicated or not. If is not dedicated, you'll find this relation to become true. And when there is dedication, then this relationship is going to become a weak one. Okay, let's have another look at a little more complex model. Here we are having different types of variables. We have tried to consider all the different types of variables. We have the independent variables, the intervening or mediating variables, the moderating variables, and the dependent variables. And we've tried to use all of them as one. Let's start with the first one, our dependent variable, which is the exam performance. We briefly looked at the portion of this example. We said the exam performance will be affected by the exam difficulty, right? So one of the things we looked at was the exam difficulty will influence the performance through stress. That is, the more the difficult the exam is, the higher the stress is, the lower the performance is. So this relationship we have drawn based on the theory that more the exam difficulty is, the higher the stress, the lower the performance. So in this case, we have the independent, intervening, or mediating variable, and the dependent variable. Similarly, there are other variables which might influence the exam performance, but in this case, we're saying understanding students' needs, teaching strategies, in-class examples will improve the understanding of the students, and this understanding of the students will then help them perform in the exam. Meaning, the higher the understanding of the students is, the higher the performance is. But what is influencing student understanding? It is the understanding student, when we are able to understand what the student wants to learn, what are the different strategies we're following, and we are trying to bring in different examples. When we have all these three things, then the understanding will increase, and once the understanding will increase, the exam performance will also increase. And here what we're saying is that the entry-level skills is your moderating variable, meaning even though we might apply different strategies for students to develop better understanding, we might apply different strategies for students to develop better understandings, but this will be moderated by the entry-level skills, meaning if the student has cleared the entry-level skills, he has the basic entry-level skills to get through the course or for the program, then he will be able to only understand. Otherwise, even you might have good strategies, but students who don't pass the entry-level skills, their understanding will not exist. Only students which have a good entry-level skills, those for them teaching strategies will influence understanding. Class examples will influence understanding. Students' needs, the effect of understanding what they need, it will affect the understanding. So these three variables will affect, provided you or for the students who have the entry-level, not for the students who fulfill the entry-level skill sets. So students which do have skill sets, they will respond, and in that case the student understanding will be developed between teaching strategies for and examples. But for students who lack the skills, these strategies, these examples will not. So this relationship, the relationship between class examples, strategies, student needs will be moderated by the entry-level skills. If the entry-level skills is there, then the student understanding will be, the relationship will exist between these three variables. And once understanding is developed, then the exam performance will be achieved, meaning the higher the understanding of the employees or the students is, the more the exam performance is. So this is a bit complicated model for starter, but generally what we try to do is we try to incorporate all 3-4 types of different variables, and now here it's affecting the relationship, here it is transforming the relationship. Basically your exam difficulty is transformed to another variable, which then results the end dependent variable. And here you're saying again this is transformed, this here it's again considered as an intervening or mediating variable, but this variable and relationship with this variable and the other independent variable will be moderated by the entry level skills. So once we are able to see all these different variables and the way they are associated and linked, we are what we say we are at the stage of developing our theoretical framework, which we said was as a conceptual model, and this model becomes the foundation of our research. On this we are able to we will be able to conduct our research, and we said this particular model is developed, is logically developed with certain logics, as I explained. All the relationships which I explained earlier were substantiated with some kind of a logic, and we need to describe. Once we are logically linked those variables, we need to describe them and elaborate them so that we are able to clearly give our point of view, our theory as to how these variables are related. So in a theoretical framework, we need to logically develop, describe, elaborate the network association, which basically is driven or obtained from the interviews, observations, and literature surveys. So these are the different sources from which we are able to find out different factors, and we, in theoretical framework, we try to associate these factors with our dependent variable, indicating the logic between them, indicating the relationship between them, elaborating the relationship between them, describing the. So in theoretical framework, so we said initially when we try to identify a problem, then we try to identify the important variables from literature. Logically, what we did was develop the network of association between these variables and elaborated, and we need to elaborate them. And once we are able to develop what we call as the network of association and elaboration, which is basically generally the theoretical framework. So if I summarize this thing, is basically theoretical framework is developing a network of associations and elaborating on them is what we call as a theoretical framework. Once you're able to do that, the next step we do is we generate our hypothesis and then test those hypotheses. The components which basically are considered in the theoretical framework are the identification of the variables. We need to identify what are the names and types of variables. In this case, we said that the variables which we had identified were the name, were let's say in the very first scenario where we're looking at sales being the variable and the type of variable being dependent variable. The other variable looked at was the advertising or the quality or the competition as your independent variables. And similarly, in the other examples, what we looked at the different mediating and moderating variables. In the case of the workforce diversity, what we looked at was workforce diversity as the independent variable, the organization effectiveness as the dependent variable, and then we said that workforce diversity is converted into synergy, and that synergy basically brings effectiveness. So in that case, synergy was considered as your intervening variable. But then further on we said that the intervening variable, the relationship between the independent variable, which is workforce diversity. So in the theoretical framework, what we tend to do is we said that it's a conceptual model, and when we said that it's a conceptual model, we said that it will have a different it has different components. Some of the components it had was the identification of variables, and we said the variables we have are like the independent variables, such as in the case of the sales was there, sales was dependent variable, advertising was our independent variable. In the case of the workforce diversity, we had the workforce diversity as independent variable, organization performance as the dependent variable. Then we said the synergy, workforce synergy, was the intervening variable, and then we said that the managerial expertise as your moderating variable, which we said that is going to affect the relationship between the workforce diversity and synergism. So once we are able to identify the variables and the name of the variables and the type of these variables, what we need to do is do a discussion on how and why these variables are related. So we need to describe in text that, okay, these are the different variables, and what is the relationship between these variables, what are these variables, the type of these variables, and the relationship these have between each other. So we need to describe how they are related and why they are related, in separately describing that this independent variable is converted into this intervening variable. Why is it converted? What is the logic behind it? What is the theory behind it? And we need to explain that. We need to also explain the direction as well. Is it a positive one or is it a negative one? So the reader is able to know that what is your point of view. In the case of, let's say, this particular example, we said that workforce diversity effects is converted into synergy, but we're saying the more the workforce diversity, the higher the creative synergy. Now in this case we're just saying the relationship is there, we're also giving the direction as well. So we need to also talk about what is the logic between the relationship, this is an independent variable, this is an intervening variable, and what is the relationship, is it a positive one or a negative one? So we need to talk about that. And once we are able to do that, we need to also describe what is why these relationships exist and what is the support from previous research. It's not that what you think or in your own way is the relationship, but you need to also explain and define that why this relationship exists and what are the existing literature says about it. So you collaborate, or you substantiate, you support your theory or your relationship as you have defined by previous researches or previous literature, which suggests that this is the type of relationship these certain variables have, and what is the type of relation, what the direction of the relationship is. Is it a positive one or negative one? But whatever you need to support it with your previous existing research, not just what you feel or you say is. You need to, of course, you need to describe that as well in your own words. That's the way we said we need to discuss that. So in the theoretical framework, you start off by identifying the variables, the type of variables they have, the independent or dependent. You need to define what is the relationship between these variables are, logically why they are, how they are related, and what are the the previous supporting researchers saying about this relationship? What are they saying about it? And once you are able to describe these relationships separately and provide adequate support as to what previous researchers have said about this kind of a relationship is, then you come and draw your what we call a schematic diagram or your research model. So these all the components to basically they cover your theoretical framework, and make sure that basically if I say and summarize this way is that basically there are two segments to developing a theoretical framework. One where you theorize, you explain different variables, what are they, what is the relationship these variables have with each other, and what is the direction of relationship they have with each other. One thing. Second thing is then you can you schematically draw in a way, the way we have drawn the diagrams we have made, like these one or this one. Then we draw one of these schematic diagrams to illustrate or to give a quick, an easy understanding of the model you think you have in mind or what you have theorized so far. So doing this, then at this stage you will be able to, or you're ready to basically complete your theoretical framework. Make sure for practice, and make sure you read the page on the book, page number 93 and 93, 94, 95 as a good illustration of how literature review is written, and from the literature review how the theoretical framework has been developed, and then from the theoretical framework how the hypotheses are developed. As a 3-page concise small example. It's a must read. Make sure you read through that, because it will give you a real good understanding of what we have talked in the last hour or so. Okay, so let's recap. What we did was, again, we talked about the different types of variables: independent, moderating, mediating variables. And we looked at different examples demonstrating that sometimes certain variables are independent variables, and sometimes they are dependent variables, and sometimes considering the kind of angle you have, you need to make sure you need to define what is the relationship or the type of relationship they have, a positive one, a negative one. Then you need to basically also look at that if this variable is a type of variable which can influence the relationship or between independent variable or the relationship, or it's an independent variable you are studying which can influence directly the dependent variable. It's upon your choice. So if you consider a variable as independent variable influencing the dependent variable, then it's another case. But if you think that this variable is affecting the relationship between the independent and dependent variable, then we know it's a moderating variable. Then we talked about the intervening or the mediating variable, which we will say it's a temporal, it's got a quality, it's a temporal quality. It will surface in between the independent and dependent variable. When the independent variable is acting on the dependent variable, the intervening variable will surface, and it will basically, the independent variable is transformed into intervening variable, or what we call as the mediating variable. And then the mediating variable or the the intervening variable affecting your dependent variable. So it's through your intervening variable the dependent variable is affected. So we talked about that today. We looked at different examples, and then we said all these variables and the relationships needs to be discussed, described, and then converted into a kind of a diagram, which we call as the schematic diagram. So theoretical framework is developed. Theoretical framework consists of, as I said, a description of variables, why these variables are important to each other, what is the relationship these variables are, what is the direction of relationship they have, what kind of support you have in the previous research, giving support to your theory as to why these relations are related the way you are saying, and then converting the whole discussion with the end with the schematic diagram explaining the kind of relationship you have. Okay, with this we conclude our session, and And we then, after this, once we're done with the theoretical framework, will be the next chapter. We'll be talking about how to develop our hypothesis statements and what are the different types of hypothesis statements we have. With this, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.